Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And as I was expecting in my previous video, there is PvP class tuning incoming on March 11th as they have released the notes for those changes moving forward. We're going to be covering them, seeing where they're going. Are they good overall? Is the meta going to change as a result of it? They are also adding a major UI update that we're going to be discussing in this video as well towards the end. So if you want to make sure that you have input towards their decision making for that, you're definitely going to want to be a part of it and join in on the conversation. But let's get started with the changes. The first one is that they are changing the human racial. It is so strange to me that we're buffing the human racial when human was such a commonly selected competitive choice, and we don't buff like Nightborn. We don't buff like the things no one plays. Like, this is a very significant change. Basically, they updated the trinket for healers to be a 90-second cooldown, but didn't update the human racial to be appropriate to that, right? Which is usually you get like a 30-second difference between them. They're basically just sharing a cooldown, which deleted the racial entirely. Now you're going to have a 60-second cooldown shared between them rather than 90 seconds. So if you wanted to play human as a healer, note that it is only for healer specs. I don't know how that's going to manage to be coded in there. You'll get out of a little bit more CC, basically, as a human, which benefits, ironically, priests, the best healer, and paladins, which is pretty close in the running there. So it's a change that it buffs the healers that are really at the top, and I would like to see more racial changes for the races that people basically don't select in the game at the moment. But this will be nice for you guys who play priest or paladin that can be a human. For Resto Druid, you're getting a 5% healing buff. That's definitely needed. I've also heard rumors that apparently their mastery is bugged. It's working at 50% effectiveness, and oftentimes they put in PvP changes in one expansion and then they're lingering into future expansions where it doesn't make any more sense, and they go in and they tweak and adjust those. So hopefully if that is the case, they can go in and reassess that and deal with that. I've seen a lot of Resto Druids. They're basically saying Ancient of Lore is now DOA, or dead on arrival, mostly because its duration is so short that you don't benefit from spawning in extra Keeper of the Groves like you do with the regular Tree of Life. And obviously the movement impairing effect is a really big deal. They're buffing it to try and help, but I don't know if this is the right way of going about it. You'll be taking 30% less damage as opposed to 20%. I don't think most people swap to kill you in this form anyway, so I don't think it's like a huge deal. As well as your mass blooming cooldown is going down from 8 to 7. Maybe this helps you in battlegrounds because the extra burst healing from mass blooming or something like that. But as far as arena, I think that PP talent is starting to fall off, and the 5% healing buff may not be enough to combat the fact that your mastery is potentially bugged or rumored to be bugged. But I do think buffing Druid is a good idea. They're buffing Preservation Evoker as well, with just flat out 20% Dream Breath healing. This is very significant, as this is one of your best heals. It's like your big spender, so definitely going to be a lot better to play Preservation. For Marksmanship Hunter, which I was surprised it didn't get nerfed the first time around, it is getting nerfed this time around. Tensile Bowstring is basically not going to reduce the cast speed of Aim Shot as much. You can sometimes borderline get it close to instant cast, so I think that's fair. You know, Aim Shot is like, you can see it coming and you can use something before it hits you, blink out a line, blink through the hunter, maybe CC the hunter. That's the point of the spell, being like that lined up hit that hits really hard, but you've got ways that you can kind of navigate around it, so I think that's fair. They also targeted the Mez build with Unerring Vision, which has a lot of hunters that don't play Mez's build, because I played Mez's build yesterday and you get like 7 million crits. That's the main reason they're nerfing it, because obviously that's like excessively high. Unerring Vision is only going to increase your crit chance by 5% down from 10, and your crit damage by 10% down from 20, so it's a 50% nerf. This really only affects you if you're playing the Mez build or trying to meme one-shot people. I think Markson will still be in a decent spot, although they didn't nerf BM, and BM Hunter is definitely a strong performer at the moment, and there's some competition between them, but I don't think this is enough to completely knock Marksmanship off of its current posting. For Survival Hunters, they were on top of the meme builds, the meme one-shot builds so far that are being targeted, and with all the modifiers towards Flanking Strike. Now, unfortunately, nerfing Flanking Strike, its baseline ability, means that, like, if you're not playing that cheese talent stack, that now it wasn't a huge contributor in your overall damage unless you were running the talents to kind of cheese it together with the right stat combination. So it's, unfortunately, this nerf is going to hurt the regular build. But Flanking Strike was already a pretty small amount of your damage in that regular build anyways, that maybe it's not a huge deal. They did compensate by giving you 4% on everything else, which is actually nice on those builds because your Wildfire Bomb still does a really huge amount of damage. Spearhead is only going to give you 15% crit chance down from 30. So that's a 50% nerf on one of your strongest cooldowns. That's definitely going to be felt. Deadly Duo increases your critical strike damage by 15% PP down from 30. These nerfs are one that I am probably more seriously concerned about survival as opposed to marksmanship hunter. So, man, you guys like survival. Other than cheesing these really big crits, I feel like it's one of the melee specs that's like really easily controlled. Doesn't have a lot of stuns or disruption. So, like, if it doesn't do enough damage, it's gonna have a hard time. I'm a bit worried about it. For Fire Mage, they targeted Frostfire specifically. Severe Temperature is now 50% effective in PP combat, and Frostfire Empowerment it basically got nerfed by 50% as well for 36 to 15%. So you're not going to get the big Frostfire bolts anymore with this. Man, you guys, dude, like these specs were not top performers last patch. You guys are immediately getting the snip. You guys are immediately getting the snip. Mistweavers and Windwalkers, Celestial Conduit is getting a 12% damage reduction. Note that they added in crowd control avoidance. So maybe finding the balance between, you know, should this ability mow people down while you literally can't do anything about the monk mowing you down, or should it be a little bit lower as far as appropriate damage? I think is their logic with that. It does seem strange, at least for Mistweaver. And Mistweaver's not getting any compensation as far as healing either. And Mistweaver's definitely struggling a bit. Would have liked to see like something like this for Mistweaver. So it's a little bit unfortunate for Mistweaver. I think for Windwalker, it's definitely fair. And Rets, you guys got your buffs. And, you know, I'll just leave you guys with a warning, bro. Like, leave you guys with a warning. I calculated these changes out. It's targeting a lot of abilities that are about like 3 to 6% of your overall damage. Ignoring Final Verdict, it's probably up, you know, 15% higher. It comes out to probably roughly to an 8% to 10% overall damage increase. And you still have Big Hammer of Lights. So I do expect there shouldn't be any more tiers, any more Ret Paladin tiers after these. But I don't think that these changes are enough that it's likely going to be in the Arms Warrior territory like it was in the preseason. But maybe it's getting close. For Discipline Priest, you guys got hit pretty hard. They're nerfing your Powered Shield, your Powered Radiance by 10%, Evangelism. Archangel's only going to increase the healing of it by 15 down from 30. This was already a massive heal that I don't even know if that really even that matters too much. Penance damage and healing reduced by 10% PvP, so just 10% across the board. And they targeted Oracle. So your Premonition of Solace Absorb is only going to be 25%. So that's the big shield that you get from being Oracle. And in exchange, they've buffed your Void Weaver. So they've been trying to balance out Oracle and Void Weaver for Disc for a while. And honestly, I wish that they'd give this much attention to a lot of the other classes hero talents that are kind of just one-sided. It's just 90% of people playing one hero talent tree. But your Void Weaver, Inner Quietus is now 25% more effective in PP combat. Your Void Blast is going to do 30% more damage, and your Void Infusion is now 60% effective in PvP combat. So I think the trade-off with this is to try and give you more opportunities, but it's really hard cast heavy, and if you've seen how high damage is, right? So you might not have a lot of time to just spam cast. And if you get CC'd at all, which you get CC'd a lot as a healer, you just kind of lose this window. I almost wonder if they need to add like a little bit of a CC immunity duration during Void Weaver for Disc. I don't think Shadow needs it. Like if you're Disc and you activate Void Weaver, you're immune to CC for like 2 seconds or something. Because it's just very difficult to actually connect any of it. It's the value from the abilities is not that bad. It's just that you just don't get to use any of the spells. The Holy Priest changes seem a bit strange to me. They're buffing Divine Hymn, which again, damage is so high that if it's killing through Divine Hymn, I feel like that's a damage tuning issue. But this is definitely Divine Hymn, especially when you're an angel, is going to do a lot. I like the buff to Holy Fire. I think Holy Priest definitely needed more damage. The Smite one, I don't know so much because you really just don't have any time to press Smite. The damage is way too crazy, and like this increase to it is not enough where you're like, oh my god, I'm pogging out, I'm hitting Smite. I would have liked to see Shadowward Pain get a buff because you do have globals to throw out an instant dot every once in a while, and it does like less than 3% of your damage even if you maintain 100% uptime on it. So these two changes I think definitely are a little bit of a help. But I don't know how much the Smite changes. Now, Subtlety Rogue is the spec where they've been experimenting a lot. And they're making significant changes. They're basically trying to rip out your burst damage and give you sustained damage. So finality is getting reduced by 50%. They're taking 5% off of your Shadow Blade's finisher effectiveness. Darkest Night now increases damage eviscerate only by 10% down from 19. Symbolic Victory now increases eviscerate by 10% down from 18. You can see like all these passive modifiers stacking up together are creating this huge multiplicative issue with burst damage. Danse Macabre now increases damage by 2% per stack down from 4. And in exchange, you're getting 20% Backstab, 20% Gloomblade, 20% Shadow Strike, 25% Rupture, 25% Eviscerate, and 10% Secret Technique damage. So if sustained damage can actually hit like high enough on Rogue and you can just stun everybody with the amount of damage like Warrior can do, you could be really OP. But if they don't manage to hit that mark and then you can't 100 year 0 people, you might just be running around not able to end games. But I do think likely this is a healthy direction for Subtlety, so you're not just a cheesy one-shot spec anymore. But it might take more tuning than this to get it to that point. I think Ellie Shaman is also getting some love here. We're shifting damage out of elemental overloads and into core abilities. So elemental overload is only going to do 60%. It's going to do 60% reduced damage. Mastery increases to physical and elemental damage is now 30% more effective though in PvP. Your Lava Burst is getting a 20% buff. Lightning Bolt is getting a 30% buff. So they're also paying attention to Stormbringer with these changes. And Chain Lightning is getting a 30% buff. Ice Fury is getting a 20% buff. Frost Shock is getting a 20% buff. And Tempest is getting a 20% buff. So the Tempest change could be really big. Again, issue with Stormbringer is much like Voidweaver, where it's really tough to just stand still and cast. But maybe Ellie can get away with it over other casters in some situations. It's kind of like when you're playing double caster and you know your Destrolog on your team is going to get trained. That's like an opportunity you can play Stormbringer, and maybe it'll be actually a choice with the changes for Ellie. But I think Ellie definitely needs a little bit of an adjustment. For Warrior, they're nerfing your Spear, so your champions might critical strike damage decreased by 15% PP down from 25%. It's not surprising, right? The crit modifiers. A lot of damage focused around more of the cheesy builds, and a lot of the classes that are just not cheese oriented didn't even get touched at all, right? Like Demon Hunters and Feral Druids performing really good right now. BM Hunters performing really good right now. We don't see anything about them. But again, it's still very early, so this seems like get rid of the stuff that's obviously annoying to just instantly die to. Try to help some of the specs that are underperforming. Would like to see a little bit of help for more of the healers. I think the preservation one that's definitely a really big one, really good one. I think a little bit more help to the healers, because right now being a healer is really rough. Would have been nice in this adjustment, and then trying to work more on the reworks and redirections that they had for some of the specs for the patch in general. So overall, I think decent changes. Bit worried about survival not being too hot after this, but I think overall pretty good direction. And now for the cooldown manager in 11.1.5. So they're going to basically be putting like weak auras in the game, so you don't need to download it, and they're trying to consolidate it into the UI, so you don't need to be downloading add-ons, because that's been given as a lot of feedback, right? Why new players don't play WoW. It's because you had to go outside third party, download these add-ons in order to play. So now, to combat the add-ons, they will become the add-ons, and they're going to be tracking essential cooldowns. They're going to be tracking utility cooldowns. They're going to have tracked bars, tracked buffs. They're going to have sections for all of this. And this is the first version of the cooldown manager, and its designed and curated list of abilities, which abilities are shown and in which order they appear, is not customizable. While you can adjust the size, opacity, location, other properties of each section of the cooldown manager in edit mode, you cannot control what abilities show up or in what order they are shown. So I could see this having some problems, because abilities that are important PvE might not be as important PvP, and I'm going to imagine that they're going to prioritize PvE in that regard. So this is where likely seeing the PTR and giving feedback for that is going to be important, and they are asking for it. So this PTR has a huge amount of changes. We covered a lot of them in my most recent video, which I'll have linked here in just a moment at the end of this one. But this is something that like we actually need to be giving them feedback, because this is definitely something that can level up the game, make it easier for players to track things without needing to download add-ons. It's just I'm concerned that it's not going to track all of the abilities that are like the most important for PvP, because obviously WoW is a dominant PvE game. So I have some concerns there. But overall, I think incorporating so the players don't need to use third-party sites and incorporations is a really good idea. I think that's a good plan overall. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.